Welcome, Aviva, and thank you very much for talking to us today about the toolkit that you've developed over at the New York City Peer and Community Health Workforce Consortium. So tell us a little bit about how this got started.
Sure, and thank you for having me talk about this and the opportunity to share the toolkit. So this got started as a project from the consortium that you mentioned, which was a group that was sort of a centralized leadership body created out of a workforce summit to really focus in on elements of the behavioral health workforce and how we could think about what's going on at this point and what can we do better. So really first starting out by a lot of information gathering, a lot of thinking about what do we know already and who are the different people who are involved, what's going on, what practices tend to be most common, what practices seem to be perceived differently among different people across the workforce. And this was really something that was brought to our attention in relationship to the peer and community health worker workforce, in particular because there is a growing recognition of the value of this workforce, and the diversity of the types of positions has really grown as well. And so with that, there's also a great variety in terms of the types of roles that peers are filling. And so what we wanted to be able to do was really create an understanding of that and really make sure that we preserve the integrity of the role while also creating additional opportunities. And after we did much of this information gathering, and you'll see a little bit about that as we go on, there was some recognition of the need to really start thinking about not just the peers themselves, but who was on the other side in terms of employers and what can they do to better support peers.
Excellent. Well, before you get started, Aviva, tell us a little bit about you, yourself.
Sure. So I am working here as the coordinator of the consortium. I also served at an earlier point as the research and evaluation coordinator at DOHMH for this consortium, which is part of the Office of Consumer Affairs. And I am someone with lived experience myself. I also am a social worker. I really am interested in blending those two together while also really pursuing some of the interests that I have in evidence-based practice and thinking about implementation and how we can really just go from knowledge to action and thinking about what can we do. So I felt like this opportunity to really get involved with the workforce of peers was a perfect opportunity for me. All right. So this is just a little bit about the toolkit itself. And the consortium we mentioned, what is the consortium? Really focusing on integration. And I think that's something that really also warrants a bit of a mention of what we mean when we say integration, because that's been a concern and a legitimate concern throughout the process. So really thinking about integration not as a blending or sort of blurring of roles, but more about coming together as sort of a complementary team and thinking about how the unique strengths of peers can really contribute to the workforce, just as the unique strengths of other roles can as well. And so to really think about how we could do that, we wanted to recognize that like any role and any group, there are strengths and there are also some gaps to consider. And so we started to think about what can we do to address these needs, given that they are so diverse and so, we recognize the diversity of needs in individuals, and we're getting better about that out there. But we really wanted to bring that into the organizational element as well. And there's only so much that can be done in knowing what would be ideal in best practice, but we wanted to be able to help organizations to really think about how they can all do this differently, but in a way that is effective. And what I mean by that is really supporting that integration and offering peers a workplace that understands their role, that allows them to be supported and supervised and recognized for the strengths that they bring to the role. And so that's really what this toolkit was designed with. The intention of was to be able to address individualized sorts of approaches to organizational readiness from the organizational perspectives. Okay, and just a bit of an overview, as we mentioned, some of the information gathering that was a part of this. So again, began with a lot of different types of information gathering, some surveys, some literature reviews for background. We spoke with many types of employers and employees and training programs, reviewed content of various roles and descriptions. And then really from there, we wanted to think about what were some of the common elements we were seeing. So we found that overall, some of the key points that really spoke to the needs of the peer workforce were that it's not that employers were not interested in going forward with this idea. Some had already and were just having some trouble. In fact, there were many employers, I think out of the 227, as you can see, who responded to the organizational survey, there were many who were very interested still in expanding their peer workforce over the next 3 years. But some of the challenges had to do with money and not knowing, well, in terms of what kind of budgeting would be helpful, knowing even the policies and procedures around reimbursement through Medicaid. And an understanding of the role itself was problematic, really not understanding what the intention of the role is and how peers could contribute to the existing models that were in place, which was also very significant in terms of successful integration, thinking about the other staff and their understanding of the role, which really is an important element for working as a team and respecting the other roles with whom you're working. So the peers also had some dissatisfaction with some of the training that was received and minimal opportunities for career advancement. So sometimes coming into the workforce and getting stuck because there weren't really opportunities to go on from there despite having great experience and continuing to grow in the skill sets, and really not being recognized in terms of the wages that were given. There was some dissatisfaction with some of the training specifically around management and supervision, which is an important part to really facilitate that opportunity for growth and for career advancement. So thinking about the self-assessment, we actually began this process separating the two. Really having a separate self-assessment and a separate toolkit. And then we realized this is really difficult for many reasons, but because the needs of all of these organizations are so varied and so diverse and different combinations of needs and just in terms of even the types of practices going on. So we really wanted to be able to find a way to blend the two and think about how this toolkit could be important and relevant and meaningful for the people who accessing it. So thinking about how a self-assessment and really identifying the areas that can be improved could then sort of inform the toolkit was really our next step. And so we wanted to think about 9 areas in particular. We had several sort of recommended practices and after reviewing some of those, thought about how they could fall into these categories. And that's essentially what we mean when we're talking about these 9 domains of practice. And these are areas that have been really significant, both in terms of the challenges that are present, but also in terms of what's been successful in supporting integration in the workplace. So this is sort of just an overview of how it works. We will access it after, we don't need to get to that link, but there is a link on the DOHMH website that this would take you to, and it allows you also to download the full version of the toolkit without the automated features that the self-assessment provides, but if you prefer to have sort of a PDF printed out of everything, it has a self-scoring guide as an option, but you can also go to this link and take the automated assessment, which we'll look at soon.
So one of the questions we get frequently is this only for people in for providers and organizations in New York City, or can anybody access it?
That's a great question. So anybody can access it, absolutely. And we've also realized that most of these, even beyond the geographic sort of application, most of these practices aren't necessarily limited to the needs of peers and community health workers. And, it's really best practice in workplace integration overall. And yet many of them are especially important for this particular part of the workforce because of the increased vulnerability that has been experienced and the lack of recognition and the challenges that have been faced in trying to get others to understand the value of the peer workforce. workforce. And so it's all the more necessary to really reinforce these practices. But yes, anybody anywhere can go to this website, click on the link and try it.